Y veo que estamos en vacaciones acá en la universidad, en la facultad, pero sin embargo veo que hay numerosos públicos. Estoy muy contento de que estén acá. Y esta noche vamos a presentar, tenemos la satisfacción y el honor de presentar al gran filósofo Lahav. Sin mayor preámbulo, voy a dar la palabra a Lahav. Con ustedes, Lahav, para el cual pido un fuerte aplauso.
Gracias. I am very happy to be here in this beautiful country.
Estoy muy feliz de estar acá en este hermoso país.
With beautiful people and beautiful landscapes, and I believe a wonderful future also, and a future in history, in philosophy as well. I would like to thank for their hospitality, for the very generous hospitality, Carmen y Jose y Professor Kruger. I'm only sorry that my Spanish is very bad, so I can understand a little bit. Más o menos. I heard la doctora Rivera. It was enough to see that we have many things in common, but I did not understand exactly. Tonight I would like to present the history of philosophical practice from the beginning of the 1980s, almost 30 years ago. But my interest is not just history. It's not history for the sake of history. My main interest is to evaluate where we are standing now and what future directions are possible for us. I hope to encourage you to be active in this field, because as you will see, it's a developing, active field. I am not presenting a theory that you should fit in. I am sure that you have new ideas because you have different experiences. Even those of you who are students can do it, like groups of students in Europe that developed real ideas. So please don't regard what I say as a final theory, but more like an encouragement for you to find your own way. I'm truly impressed by how much interest in philosophy and how many interesting philosophers there are in Peru. So perhaps if you should bring new blood to the development of philosophical practice, it is important that perhaps you should study English, no? We would be able to speak. I think that there is an amazing potential here in Peru. You have a different experience. You come from a different place. You can add new blood. Okay. I said that I will present the history of philosophical practice. Of course, I will talk about it from my own personal perspective, from the perspective of the things that are important for me. So let me say a few words about me, about where I am coming from, about my activity. I was born in Israel, in Jerusalem, and I started to study philosophy at the university about 30 years ago. And already at the beginning, I noticed that on the one hand, philosophy touches real things. It asks questions about real life. But on the other hand, the philosophy that I found in the university was very abstract and theoretical. And for me, I felt for many years ambivalence. Philosophy attracted me, but it was not enough. I was thirsty for something more real. And although philosophy talked about life, it was hard to live that philosophy. But I continued in philosophy, and I started to teach in the university in Dallas, in Texas. And then, in 1992, I heard that there is such a thing as philosophical practice. This was the first year that I lived and taught half the time in Israel and half the time in the United States. There was already somebody in Israel that was experimenting, and I then went to Europe to talk with the groups in Holland and in Germany. But I discovered that philosophical practice was only at the very beginning. People were only experimenting. And so I started to experiment by myself with volunteers. And I decided that what was necessary at that time was to create an international dialogue where people would talk about it. So I collected articles from people who were involved in the field and published a collection, the first book in English. And I wanted to do the first international conference on philosophical practice. Some universities did not want it, cost money. Until I met Lima, who at that time worked in Canada on ethics. And together we managed to convince his boss, the professor, to hold the first international conference in Canada. But very soon I left the field for several years. I was disappointed, I was disillusioned, because philosophical practice became small philosophy. The people used philosophy to solve everyday problems, not to elevate life, not to make life deeper. And so I just left for several years, until about 3 or 4 years ago, when I realized that it is possible to do philosophical practice in a deeper way. Philosophical practice can be big philosophy, grand philosophy. It doesn't have to be trivial. So this is where I'm coming from. Everything I will say will be from this perspective, from the perspective of the desire, the longing, the yearning to have a philosophy that really makes a difference to our everyday life. So not everybody in philosophical practice shares my yearning, my longing. So I'm speaking only in my name, not in the name of those who have different conceptions of what philosophical practice is. I would like to suggest that we can look at those 26 years of philosophical practice in 3 stages, 3 visions about what philosophical practice is and what it can do. In the workshops that I will give, we will experiment with 2 of those visions. And my hope is to give you concrete tools to experiment and to continue to explore in your own way. I live in the United States, and Americans are said to be very practical people. So in my workshops, I'll try to be very practical. Let's look together at the history of philosophical practice and the 3 visions as I see them. Let me quickly say that these are the vision of philosophical practice as solving personal problems, philosophical practice as developing self-understanding, and philosophical practice as a search for wisdom, as a way of life. And we will experiment in the workshops with number 2 and 3. We all know that already in ancient times, Greek philosophers tried to use philosophy to guide life. But in modern times, usually people say that the first step was done by Gerd Achenbach, the German philosopher Gerd Achenbach. There were obviously individuals before Achenbach who experimented with philosophy and therapy or philosophy and counseling. But Achenbach was the first person who created an organization, a group of people that worked on philosophical practice. Now, Achenbach is a complex person, a complex thinker, but I think that what he did resulted in a certain very specific conception of philosophical counseling. I would even say that from my perspective, his influence was trivialization. Not he's not trivial, but his influence was trivialization of philosophical practice. Because what did Achenbach do? He borrowed the framework of psychotherapy and applied it to philosophical counseling. this is a very specific framework, because philosophical practice could have been different. For example, it could have been groups of people that are equal that work on themselves, like, for example, some religious groups or sects. Or it could have been like the Falun Gong in China that don't take money for what they do. Or it could have been like Socrates, who goes to the market and asks questions. Right? There are many possibilities to bring philosophy to life. But Achenbach chose one way, the way that is common in psychotherapy, which is 1 hour of talking about the client's problems. The result of this was that the philosophical practice after Achenbach became philosophical counseling. It became, more specifically, counseling that is designed to help the client solve their problems. Somebody has a problem with his wife. He comes to the philosophical counselor. The philosophical counselor can analyze and helps the man to improve his relationship. Somebody else has a problem with self-confidence. He comes to the philosopher, and together they analyze what is happening, and after 5 or 7 or 9 meetings, the person has better self-confidence. So this, I think, is the result of Achenbach's choice to accept the psychotherapeutic framework. Let's call this kind of philosophical practice the problem-solving vision. And unfortunately, it is still very common in the United States and in England. Lou Marinoff, for example, if you read his book, it's pure problem-solving, right? I am his friend, we are friends, but I think I want to distinguish between friendship and professional criticism. So Lou Marinoff, perhaps you have heard of Peter Raab from Canada, and many others in the United States and England. Now, why do I say unfortunately? Why don't I like this approach? First of all, a small point is that it is really exactly like what is called cognitive psychotherapy. Cognitive psychotherapy is one of the 3 main streams in contemporary psychotherapy. Really what they are doing is cognitive psychotherapy. But more importantly, if my goal as a philosophical counselor is to solve the problem of the client, then I don't care about whether my philosophy is deep or superficial. What is important is that the person will be happy after 5 or 6 meetings. Sometimes very trivial things make people happy. So if I don't care about the depth of the philosophy, it's not seriously philosophy. Philosophy searches for Sophia, for wisdom, not to make people happy, content with a little everyday fun. Philosophy is a search for wisdom. Wisdom is sometimes difficult. It's a difficult road. Imagine that I have a client, okay, we have a client, and that client has a problem because her boyfriend left her and she's very depressed. And now I think that I have 2 alternative roads that I can go in my counseling. Either we go deeply into the idea of love, but I know that it will not help her, it will make her just more sad. Or I tell her some trivialities, some petty things, and make her happy. So if my goal is to make her happy, if my goal is to solve her problems, I will prefer to go in the superficial way that makes her happy, and not in the deep way that is more difficult. So I want to suggest that this direction of philosophical practice, philosophical counseling, is not a good way. It's not a deep way. I have nothing against it. If someone can help somebody else to be happy, fine. But it's not real philosophy. In the beginning of the 1990s, no, actually I should say in the mid-1990s, after a short period where I was in that vision, to my embarrassment. I think others as well, realize that this is not a deep way to do philosophy. And so a new direction of philosophical practice developed. I was very active in, but I am sure that I was not the only one. And this was the idea that philosophy does not solve problems. On the contrary, it can make problems even more vivid. It does not solve predicaments, but sometimes it raises predicaments. So philosophical practice, what it should do, according to this second vision, is to develop our self-understanding, to be more aware of the basic issues that we are confronting in life. And the point is that in everyday life, we are all the time answering basic philosophical issue. Not just in our thoughts, but in our choices, in our emotions, in our hopes, anxieties. I will give you a couple of simple examples. Imagine that my good friend is going out with a new girlfriend. He has a new girlfriend. And for 3 weeks, he does not tell me that he has a new girlfriend. And when I hear about it, I'm very offended. My good friend did not tell me about his new girlfriend? You can say that this is an emotion, right? I'm offended. But my feeling, my emotion, really says something about what friendship is. My emotion says friendship means sharing personal information. So although I never thought in theory, I never thought in my thoughts about what is friendship, in actuality, my emotion spoke a certain conception of love, or of friendship. Our emotion, our behavior, our choices, all the time interpret the world. They are answering deep philosophical issues, although we are not aware of this. Last semester in Israel, a student of mine in some exercise of philosophical counseling told me that the greatest moment in his life that he always thinks about and he longs to have it again was when he was in a football game, and the Israeli football team won, and it was an ecstasy. Now, if you go a little bit deeper, the fact that for him it is such a beautiful experience that he continues to think about and to long for is really a statement about what is important in life. It's a statement that ecstasy, going out of my private everyday business, is very valuable. This is what life is all about. It's an answer to the question, what is important in life? What qualities are important in life? Of course, it's not that simple. You have to talk with a person and to see what exactly is happening there. But I am giving very short examples. So when you go home after this lecture, you do one thing or another. Perhaps you turn on the television and you watch a certain movie, or take the phone and call your boyfriend or girlfriend or your wife, or decide, why not go to the sea tomorrow to have just an easy day? So according to this vision, in those moments you're answering basic philosophical questions. You're constantly making statements about what is important in life, what is friendship, what is love, what does it mean to be free, what is ethical and non-ethical, not in your thought and your theory, but in your behavior that you're often not aware of. I remember that I once had a counselee that her clothes were very, very loud with amazing colors and very strange. Everybody looked at her in the street. This was a statement. It was a statement about what is important from her perspective. What is she? What is I for her? Of course, she did not do it consciously. When I asked her, why do you wear today, why do you wear those clothes? What do you think she said to me? She didn't say, oh, I have a philosophy of life. She didn't say that, right? So what do you think she said? Because I like it. Okay? So the person is not aware of the meaning of the choices that he or she makes. So according to this vision then, the second vision, the role of philosophical practice is to expose these everyday answers to basic philosophical questions. Think about this. I suggest that you look at yourself, look at specific moments, and see they could have been different. You could have behaved differently. Yesterday when you got angry at somebody, you could have behaved you could have reacted differently. What does it mean that you behaved this way and not that way? I'm not asking a psychological question. I'm not asking about the psychological mechanism, repression. I'm asking what kind of philosophical statement this is. In the workshops that I will give, not the day after tomorrow, but later, we will work on that. We will start working on that and some other things. But we will work on this to make it more vivid, more concrete. We will experiment with that. I will give some case studies from my own experience, and we will try to understand what kind of answers to philosophical question that person is making. And we will then try to do it on ourselves. We will try to be a counselor and a counselee and try to see how that works. And I hope that this will give you tools to experiment with philosophical counseling of this second type. But okay, it seems it's an interesting vision, isn't it? The idea that we are philosophers in everyday life. We are philosophizing through our emotions, through our choices, through our behavior. Right? But about 10 years ago, I came to the conclusion that it's a good step, but it does not go far enough. And I was not the only one. I will mention some people who talk about wisdom and some people who talk about Bildung. Bildung is a German word for growing or educating yourself. The idea is, in this third vision, that philosophy can do more than just make us aware of the meaning, the philosophical meaning of our life. Philosophy can transform us. It can raise our life. It can put our life in different coordinates if philosophy becomes a way of life. Not just something that we look at life in the counselor's office. I can be a philosopher not only in the office of the counselor, but every day, every moment. Now, when I talk to you, when I eat, when I go on a bus, the point is that I can live philosophically, not just think philosophically about my life. Because what is Philosophia? It's the love of wisdom. Wisdom is not something that I do between 4 and 5 in the afternoon. If I am a wise man, I'm a wise man. I'm not a wise man in a certain hour. Here, the allegory of the cave by Plato is a wonderful allegory. We all live in a cave, partly personal cave, partly cultural cave. These are limitations, certain patterns of thinking or feeling or preferring. And according to Plato, the goal of philosophy is not to make our life in the cave more comfortable, like in the first vision of philosophical practice. Right, I am sure that you all read or learned, studied this allegory. The goal of philosophy is not to rearrange the shadows and to make them more comfortable in my life. It's not to solve problems within the cave, but it's also not the second vision, which is to understand my cave. Right? The second vision means that I become more aware of my cave, of the patterns, of the conceptions of my behavior. The goal of philosophy, according to this third vision, is to go out of the cave, to have a life that is bigger than the cave, to transcend who I am, to go beyond who I am. This is an amazing vision, isn't it? It may not even be practical, it's so high. But this is the goal that I think philosophical practice should have. Philosophical practice, I think, according to this third vision, tries to take us a little bit, as far as possible, out of the cave in which we live. Okay? And that is called wisdom, or some people use the word Bildung. This is where I am exploring now. This is what is important for me now. The third vision includes the second vision. I have to understand my cave in order to get out, but it goes beyond the cave. And notice one thing, that if the goal is to live a bigger life, if the goal is to go beyond my boundaries, mi carrera, then philosophical practice is not a profession, it's not something that I get money for it. It's a way of life, a way of being.